Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, and I am so excited that you are joining me today because I've got a special guest, and we're going to be talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is blending of personal life and work life and how that all works and how you can best manage it. So if you're a business owner or a small business, or if you are just someone who cares about how your business is run, you're going to get a lot out of this episode. So let's jump right in and meet Kevin. Let's talk with Kevin about all things business. Kevin, how are you today?
Good, Kurt. Thanks for having me, man.
So tell me about what the work you do. You consult business owners. Tell me about how did you get into that? What's the work you do? And yeah, tell me all about it.
Yeah, so do you know how business owners and business leaders invariably at some point in their entrepreneurial journey feel like their company is out of control?
No,
Right?
never. It's
It
very foreign subject to me.
right. It's chaotic. I mean, they're not able to recruit, retain, and reward the best people. They're not executing. People are not on the same page, and they know that they can do better.
Yeah.
So what I help them do is determine what and then focus on the handful of things that really truly matter to their success and then to execute on those things. And when we do that, what we find is that they have a driven business, driven business that makes them more money,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives them the life that they want, that they always have dreamed about. And that end point is what brings me the greatest reward. When a client says, gosh, Kevin, I was able to take my wife to the play on Saturday, or I made it to my kid's basketball
Yeah.
game, or those things that give them joy and happiness in life. That's the work that feeds my soul, and that's what Gyolai Consulting does.
Well, and that's, I think a big part of it, the consultancy is really important because it's even with an MBA, they don't teach you all these things that, I mean, that's why people go and they're like, all right, I'm going to get an MBA and I'll be able to cover all the business aspects of things. But then you have to imagine the human factor as part of it. And it's something I struggled with as a business owner early on as well, is that you figure, well, I hire smart people. They're all adults. They are going to, be able to do all these things. And it's just, and the business, I'll just do all the things that you're supposed to, right? You pay your taxes and you pay employment tax and you pay, and you invoice and it's all set, right? No.
Right.
Why is it so difficult for some folks? Is there common things that you see, Kevin, that people run up against?
Yeah, I think the reason it's so difficult, Kurt, is because people don't start their businesses with the right question in mind, which is, what do
Mm,
I want out of this?
okay,
What do
sure.
I want out of my life? And what do I need to do to organize and design my business in a way that's going to provide that? So one of the things that I do with my clients is I help them determine what that why is. And we have an exercise that we do that's called the must-haves. And I take them through that exercise of determining their own personal must-haves, those
Mm,
things in their life that are non-negotiable. And without those things in their life is completely out of alignment and they're
okay.
not going to be happy. So for me, for example, when I designed Gyolai Consulting as a business, one of the things that was on my mind is that I wanted to always have a loving and honest relationship with my children.
Mm,
And that meant that I needed to be present for them. And that was a
sure.
priority. And I was going to put that ahead of anything else that I did. Now, another business owner might say that one of their priorities is that they want to grow a business into something that they can sell that provides them then with life-changing wealth. If that's their jam, then that's their jam. But they have to be brutally honest with what
Yeah.
those things are and what they want out of life. And sometimes clients will push back on me and say, hey, that this feels really sort of soft and fluffy. And I'm like, no, it's the opposite. It is brutally honest, and you have to decide what you want out of your life.
Yeah.
And is your business going to provide you with that life that you want? And if the answer is no, you're never going to find true happiness in your life, and your business will not be a vehicle that provides that.
Yeah. Well, and I see so many businesses that are started because for the simple fact they don't want to work for other people.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so to your point though, that impacts how their relationship is with their customers, with their employees, everything. Because if they don't have those non-negotiables figured out, and it is sort of you become a very confusing leader because you don't know where your line is. So your line shifts regularly, right? One day you really care about the customer interaction, the next day you don't care so much, and so your employees and your customers are always constantly trying to figure out like who is this person I'm dealing with. And so I think to your point, Kevin, it's very important that you put a stake in the ground, you draw a line in the sand, name a metaphor,
Mhm.
that you say, this is why this exists. This is the goal. This is what I'm trying to achieve with this business. What do you
Right.
say to people when they say things like, well, I just, I don't, my goal is not to work for other people, or my goal is to just make cool stuff, or, what if what do you say to people that have sort of these, I don't know, I think non-realistic goals?
Yeah. So the people that I work for, the companies that I work with, are already successful companies in the sense that they are generating revenue, they have product or service. Um, they usually have a leadership team. So they have an owner that understands how to be successful in business, but doesn't maybe understand the steps to go to the next level. And that next level also providing them with freedom from their business. So what I help them do is determine, who do you need to surround yourself with so that you can create a systems driven business that
Yeah,
provides you the opportunity to work from the standpoint of what is your unique weirdness, your
sure.
special gifts that only you can do. And
Mm,
typically then the people that hire me are usually visionaries. They're
uh,
people that hate operations,
yep,
and they want to be out there connecting with others,
yep,
creating the next product and service,
yep.
meeting with people, doing all of those things that visionaries do. And the biggest thing that holds them back usually is that they're not willing to release this illusion of
Right,
control of the daily operation of their business to
right.
someone else that they trust to do that. So a common scenario for me is that someone will reach out to me, usually unsolicited, right, just through the website, that says, "Hey, Kevin, I think I need a fractional chief operating officer. And can you call me?" And we call them and we have a discussion. And we find out that their company consists of 3 people and they don't have a leadership team and they don't really need a chief operating officer, right? They,
Yeah,
they
right.
need a whole bunch of stuff before they can afford to hire basically a president of their company.
Mm-hmm.
But they know that they need capacity outside of what they care to do. So my thinking around this is from a book called The E-Myth Revisited.
Yes, great book, great book. I
Great
definitely,
book.
anybody watching this, the E-Myth is a great, it's a must read if you're doing your own business.
Yeah, and it gets to exactly what you were saying, which is most people that start their own business think, well, I'm smarter than my boss. I don't want to work
Yep,
for someone else,
yep, yep,
or I'm really good at making this thing.
yep. I could do
And
this
then
way
they
better
don't
than all these
understand.
other people.
Yeah, and then they don't understand that, okay, if I'm going to have a business, I actually have to wear all the hats of everything that needs to be done in this business, and I can't do it, right? And they get to a certain point where they're like, suddenly they wake up one morning and they're like, I'm totally bored and I hate my business.
Yep, yep, because they're not doing what they got started to do in the beginning.
Exactly. So some
Yep.
of the greatest success that I've had with clients has been when I've been able to release them from the burden of operations.
Mm.
The true visionaries, where they're able to go do the things that they're really good at, that they love to do, that brings them joy and happiness and feeds their soul, and it breathes new life into their business, and they love their business again.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone like yourself that provides services to other business, that's a beautiful place to be, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
It is. And that's the key is you have to really, because again, since we're a service-based business,
Hmm.
you have to really care about the work. And
Yeah.
if you let the business grind you down, you start to care less and less, not only about the business, but about the work.
Right.
And that's when it starts to show all over the place. And then you don't know why all these things are happening. And you try to throw money at the problem. You try to throw people at the problem. But speaking of throwing people at the problem, like the question you brought up earlier is, okay, well, we need an operations person. Let's just get an operations person in here. But it sounds like what you're saying is that an operations person just can't come in and fix all the things. You've got to have foundational pieces in place before you bring that person in, right?
Right. And I think it's also important that the company has to be of a certain size that you can afford and that it makes sense to have a dedicated operations person. And beyond that, though, the operations person has to be someone who loves operations, who loves being that number two person that can be behind the visionary, but strangely equal with the visionary,
Right.
but allows that visionary to do what they really do best. So, can I give you an example of
Yeah, please.
that's worked for me? So, this is a company that's given me permission to share some of these details. One of my very favorite clients of all time is a company based out of the United Kingdom called Kero.com. They're a digital marketplace that connects buyers and sellers of vacation properties in Europe, primarily in Spain, Portugal, France, and Italy. So if you go to Kero.com, what you'll see is a listing of properties, and the customers of Kero.com are actually the listing agents. And so a person looking to buy buy a vacation home in Europe would go to Kero.com. They'd find these listings. And then what Kero.com does is it facilitates a discussion between the buyer and the seller, right? Or
Okay.
the buyer and the person that's able to sell it. So they reached out to me. They'd been in business for 21 years, and they had
Mm.
just reached a limit where like they kind of hated their business. It was a husband and wife team, and
Sure.
they didn't have the kind of life they wanted to have. And they
Mm-hmm.
knew that they could do better because they had great people, they had an awesome product, but their happiness was being sucked from them in the sense that they were visionary stuck doing operational work. And they looked for lots of solutions to that. And they'd read a lot of books. And they had decided rightfully that they needed someone that they could trust that was going to come in and put them on this pathway to having a systems driven business. So they needed processes, they needed everything. They needed, like, how do you do a meeting
Mm-hmm.
that you
Right.
actually get stuff done? How do you solve your problems in real time and not kick the can down the road? How do you hold each other accountable in a gentle way by doing weekly
Right.
report outs? How do you run this business so that they can go for 2 months on a vacation and the machine continues to run and their people are able to step up? Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
There's laser sharp focus, all that kind of stuff. People don't inherently know how to do that. And you can read all the books on operations that you want. The thing that's missing is having someone that's been there and done that, that guides you through that and coaches you and leads you and takes you through that journey
Been
and
there
stands
before.
beside you. That kind of transformational experience almost impossible by yourself, right? You really
Yeah.
need someone that guides you through that. And what was missing in the marketplace from my perspective was this person, this service that was going to take those kinds of entrepreneurs through that journey but not stay around and remain to be part of the problem. And by that I mean, like, be able to demonstrate you can do this. These are the things you do. Here's some systems, and then teach them how to do that. And that, so for
Right.
me, being able to do that with Kero.com and to have those business owners say, hey, we're going to go away for 2 months, and we never would have been able to do this if it weren't for you.
Mm-hmm.
That brings joy and happiness to my heart.
I can imagine. Well,
Yeah.
and that's the thing where I see a lot of business owners struggle because they can't let go. And it's not only driving them crazy, it's driving their employees crazy.
Yeah.
Because they do hire these people and say, all right, I'm putting you in charge of shipping or whatever the case may
Mhm.
be. And but that person really isn't in charge of it. They always have to run everything by that person. And I've seen this over and over again, Kevin, where
Yeah.
I've talked to that business owner and they're like, well, this person can't do their job without talking to me. And I'm like, well, then stop talking to them. Well, but they have these questions, and it's this vicious cycle of that employee saying, well, I've been taught by the owner that I need validation
Mhm.
before I can make a weighty decision. And the owner is struggling because they're like, why isn't this person making decisions? Is that something
Yeah.
you've run into a lot? How do you
Yeah,
handle something
absolutely.
like that?
Yeah, so one of the things that really comes to mind when I listen to you talk about that is, in terms of leadership, there are some things that the military gets really well. They understand it. And part of what you're saying is about a kind of decentralized command structure where, and we see this too, Kurt, as you know, I'm a paid on call firefighter in the city of Apple Valley. And something that I learned in the fire service too is that you really can't manage more than 5 to 7 people at a time.
Hmm.
And by manage them, you can't stand there and hold their hand as they're doing something. You have to be able to set a vision, have a clear mission, tell that person what the outcome is, what the intent in military terms would be, the commander's intent, and then trust them and release them to do that, to do the task how they see is best, and to accomplish the mission, even if it's a task,
Yep.
right? And if you don't do that, and for people like you and me, this is just so clear, but people struggle with it. It's a common thing in business owners that if you micromanage people, you will have one of two outcomes. You will only keep those people who want to be micromanaged, who are
Hmm.
task oriented people, who will never help you grow your company. They're very important, and all companies need those task oriented
Sure.
people, but they're not going to be the people that are going to help you go to the next level. Or you're going to lose your best and brightest people because, no kidding, 2 weeks of that and they're like, oh crap, I've made a bad decision coming to this
Yep.
company. I got to get the hell out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because
you're going to have,
I've seen that happen where they hire on this person. They're like, we want you to come in and change our business. We want you to come in
Mhm.
and figure out this stuff, especially if it's this leadership position. And I've seen that person come in and just be immediately neutered
Yeah,
because they run up against what is actually the problem, which is a cultural problem, right? To your
yeah,
point, right? You get these systems in place, which allows for us to build better constraints around the culture in a way that people can actually get a hold of it and understand its importance and its impact to the organization. But if you bring in somebody and you're like, here, go crazy, do all this stuff, and a couple of weeks in, you're like, oh, why are you doing that? You should be always telling me before you do that sort of thing.
yeah,
And then the next week, it's, oh, I wouldn't have written that email that way. And the business owner at that time, and I've seen this, they might be thinking, I'm just giving this person feedback.
hmm,
But they don't understand the weight that they have in those conversations and how much impact they can have. I've talked to so many business owners who are just completely naive. They think they're all lapdogs, but they're all Great Danes walking through the building.
yeah,
They're Tyrannosaurus Rexes to the
right,
people, right? But to them, they're like, hey, I'm part of the team. I'm just hanging out. I'm just talking with them. Oh, I'm just giving you some feedback, and then I'm out. And then, oh, I'm just sitting in on this meeting. They think that they are, but they don't understand the weight that they have and how much of an impact that can have in that employee experience.
yeah. And I think a big part of solving that issue and solving that problem is, there's two things. There's the cultural piece.
Yeah.
If you don't intentionally create the culture of your company, the universe will create a culture for you. And it won't be what you want, right? It will take on something that is not even recognizable to you.
Right.
So don't leave culture of your organization to chance. And secondly, if you create, and when I say you, I don't mean the business owner or the leader, but you get a group of people together and you say, let's create a process for how we do this thing. and let's make it as simple as it possibly can in as fewest words possible, but anyone can understand it. If
And we
you
all
create
agree to it.
and all we all agree to it, and the people closest to that process get a big chunk of the say in
Hmm.
how that process is done. That also allows the business owner or leader to withdraw from the micromanagement temptation, right? And be able to say, okay, we have a process for that. And you
Yeah.
manage to the process then. And something else that's sort of related to this, but it might take us down a little bit of a different tangent, is that one of the things that I see that is something that's not easy to fix, but it's easy for me to identify, is when people have organizational charts that are organized around people and personalities rather than
Oh
capacity.
yeah. Oh, I've seen that. Right, the
Yeah.
squeaky wheels and those sorts of things. Right.
Yeah. So if you're the business owner, then one of the things that I teach my clients is, how are you going to create an organizational chart that is based on what your organization needs, not the people that you have? And that can be a really scary, threatening thing, because there may be some people in your
Yeah.
organization that have been there for a long time that simply don't fit with a capacity that's on your org chart. And
Right.
if that's the case, then you're having perhaps a difficult conversation with that employee. But if you don't do that, then your business will be organized around people and personalities rather than what it needs. And making decisions based on what's in the best interests of the business is something that business leaders absolutely have to do every single day. And so many people need help getting that part right.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I try to coach myself when I'm talking to employees that work for me, is that I also need to be held accountable. And so here's in the ways that I feel like I need to be held accountable, and I have open and honest conversations with
Mhm.
those people to, whereas I've seen other owners, they just kind of deal with stuff when it comes up, instead of anticipating that these potential issues and those things could happen, right? And that those lines being crossed, right? Because
Yeah.
I think again, if you're not willing to allow yourself to be managed up to, and you just expect that everything is weighing on your shoulders, well, you've kind of done that to yourself. You can't blame the employees.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really like about what you're saying, and I think is something that's true of really good leaders, is that they will do things like, in an all company meeting, say, have you got any questions for me?
Hmm.
Ask me anything you want. And for that person to be able to stand up there and say, oh, well, this is why I did that, or no, we're not going to do that, or no, or have the skill to know, well, okay, they might ask me a question. I don't necessarily have to give an answer to that question. But a good leader puts themselves out there where they make themselves available to that kind of accountability and
Yeah.
feedback. And there's 100 ways to do that. So one of the ways is to be like, okay, I'm gonna have an all company meeting, and I'm just gonna ask people, is there anything you want to talk about? And then there's a culture that has to be in place in order for that to actually work, right?
Right.
But you can build to that. And another thing is in the roadmap, like, so if the company creates a plan, let's say, a company has a strategic plan, and you have these 5 things that you want to do this year, these 5 big strategic things. Usually, one or more of those strategic things has got to be associated with something having to do with the company going in a transformational direction. And usually,
Hmm.
then that's going to be a senior leader that owns that. How is that senior leader being held accountable to getting that done? And
Yes.
how is he or she reporting out on that? Because I think one of the biggest things that are important for employee happiness, and this is not my idea, the data shows this. There's all kinds of articles in Harvard Business Review about how do you have happy employees. And one of the things that you need to do to have happy employees is you have to share the metrics of your company with them to the extent that that's appropriate to do that. They deserve to know how things are going. And that includes, how are the senior leaders being held accountable to what they said they were going to do?
Yep.
And I think that kind of culture, Kurt, is what leads to this component that maybe we can talk about, that companies now have absolutely got to get right, because of how we're different now from COVID, which is how do you have engaged, healthy, happy, productive employees coming out of this pandemic? And the companies that get that right are going to be selected for, like natural selection, survival
Oh,
of the fittest.
100%.
They're going to be the ones that are going to really come out of this and move not just incrementally forward, but they're going to take leaps forward in their business success and their development. So there's this concept in biology, as I'm a biologist by training, that's called punctuated equilibrium.
Mm.
So there's a kind of natural selection that we all know about, which is survival of the fittest, which means that some kind of organism or an organization has a kind of adaptive ability that allows it to be more successful. Usually that's very slow. But sometimes in nature, we see things happen that allow organisms, and I believe this is true of companies and organizations as well, where suddenly the selective pressures have changed dramatically and the evolution of the company can go forward in a huge leap. That's called punctuated equilibrium, and there's loads of examples of that in nature. And I think we're in this punctuated equilibrium right now, where the companies that can figure out how do I move to a results-oriented work environment where my people can work digitally from anywhere in the world that they want
Hmm.
to? How can they have a kind of ownership of their work? How can I empower them to do their work while not micromanaging them and create a culture that allows us to be successful by focusing relentlessly on a small number of priorities? Those companies that figure that out are going to be madly successful.
Yeah. Well, if you look, Amazon's original name was going to be Relentless. That was the original name for Amazon. Um, so yeah, to that point, Kevin, it brings me back to so many discussions I've had about that being intentional as that leader. So I've seen other leaders, after a meeting saying, well, I asked them to ask me anything and they didn't, nobody says anything. I'm like, well, that's your fault. That's not their fault, because you have a culture where people didn't feel free to
Right.
speak up in that environment, and you have helped create that. So
Yeah.
what are you doing about that? Or to your point, I just recently talked to a leader where I suggested the same thing you did, where maybe sharing some of the company metrics might, improve some employee engagement. And they were like, well, nobody ever asked for that. People aren't interested in that. I'm like, is
Yeah,
this just anecdotal information you have, or you've taken a survey?
I think they don't want to get caught in the financials, right? They don't really want to that's not what we're talking about. It's sort of like, how are we doing?
Hmm.
How are
Yep.
we doing? Hey, we're landing these big accounts, or we missed this account, and this is why we think we didn't get that account.
Hmm.
We're on track in terms of our strategic priorities. Those kinds of things. I'm not talking
Right.
about financials. I'm talking about those other kinds of success indicators, like how did we do on our survey of employee satisfaction?
Yep.
Where did
Yep.
we really suck? And where are we going to focus our energies? And when those results come back, even if you pick one of those things. So I work with my clients, I do a kind of organizational checkup that's based on a whole bunch of things, but one of them is culture. And even if you take and you find one nugget of information from that cultural survey, and this is numerical on a scale of 1 to 5, and let's say you're knocking it out of the park, you're getting 4.5 on all these metrics, and suddenly you get to one that's 3, and the one that's 3 says employees have an overall understanding of how their work is important to the success of the company, and people have a 3 out of 5. A 3 might be good. It depends on your culture, but you look at that and say, well, I think we can certainly do a better job of helping our employees understand why their work matters. And then if you're the
Yep.
senior leader, you're going to say, okay, what are some things that I'm going to do to make that happen? And you're going to prioritize that, right? Or you're not. And if you don't, then be ready to deal with the consequences of that, right?
Yep. Right. Yep.
Because, Kurt, there's nothing more important right now than getting the people and the culture piece right.
Hmm. Yep. Because
People
there's so
have to
many
do
other
it.
options out there for people, right? They don't
Yeah,
have to
for
stick
sure.
around and deal with your crap.
Yeah.
Um,
And in
and
your
they,
world, in the technical world, in IT, I mean, there's a culture anyway of people,
yep.
switching jobs rapidly from one
Yeah.
environment to another
Yep.
and frequently.
Yep. Yep, and it's something you've got to plan for because you can't control all of that, right? But to your point, one of the things we do in like our all staff meetings is we talk about sales opportunities, things that are coming up, because people are always interested in like, what's the next thing I'm going to be working on? That's something we've heard from employees over and over again. So they, even if that, that potential partnership doesn't go through, that's not the point. They love to hear about that progression, that growth, those sorts of things. So to your point about, now you don't want to share like quarterly numbers, but just sharing the impact and the things that are challenging you as a leader, the things that you're excited about, the things that you're not so excited about, because not only does that convey kind of the health of the business, it also helps convey what's important to you as a leader that people then can respond to, because there's so many cues you give off as a leader. Back to my thing about being a lapdog versus a Great Dane. Is that as you're interacting with employees and people, you're constantly giving off so many cues, verbal, visual cues on what's important to you and what isn't important to you, and people pay attention to those things. And if you're not more intentional with your communication, both verbal and nonverbal, don't be surprised if people get the wrong message sometimes.
Right.
And that's okay. It's okay if you make a mistake. It's just a matter of how do you take those mistakes and not just vent about them, but actually do something about it, because otherwise then, just like you said, the business will start to run you.
Yeah.
Right?
So there's, if your listeners and viewers take a nugget away from this one,
Yeah.
that I think is a really good one that sort of gets to what you're talking about, is if you're the senior leader or you're a leader of a team and you encounter in passing on a Zoom call or in the old days when we were together physically, and you ask that person that reports to you, or even if they don't report to you, someone that's below you in the org structure, hey, what are some barriers? What's a barrier that you're running up against in your work? And they tell you, and you help them tear down that barrier, you will get such a tremendous response from that employee, because you just demonstrated that you listen and that you care, and that your job as a senior leader is not to micromanage them, but to facilitate them being successful in their job.
Right.
And the success of your people and the customer is the success of the company. And that's a very clear correlation, right? It's not even a correlation. It's a cause and effect.
Right. Well, and on top of that, you're showing them that your role has value. It has impact. Not just in the title sense that you personally are bringing value to that role.
Yeah.
And that's really important for people to understand. Like a project manager, like, is going to project manage, but you personally bring a special flavor to it. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Kevin, because it is about giving that, but it's not only telling them that they're doing a good job, but it's about showing what their place is in the larger impact, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that gets to that is when you have a strategic plan at your company, which everybody does, and usually they're sitting on the wall or sitting on the desk gathering dust, which is a huge waste of money and resources, by the way. You should have a roadmap for how you're going to accomplish the priorities on your strategic plan. And that roadmap should include things like who's responsible? What are the key performance indicators? What's the timeline? What are the milestones for achieving that? And that should flow all the way down to the individual employee. So the company sets the priorities, right? So for at the Foundry, you've got 5 or 6 main priorities. Then the teams decide how and which of those priorities are they going to address. And then the members within the team decide as individuals, what are they going to do to address the priorities of the team,
Yep.
which address the priorities of the company.
Yep.
And the work of earning that strategic plan falls to the individual. And if that's clear to them as a leader, if it's like, hey, Joe, software developer, the success of this company depends on you, and we have every faith in your ability to execute on that. What can we do to help make that happen for you? And they're going to answer that question. They're going to have some ideas.
Mm-hmm.
about what you can do. And
Yep.
what better situation to be in as a leader than to own a really good company and for people to bring you problems,
Yep. Yeah,
right?
and ones that they're excited about solving too, right? And feel that they can actually have a hand in solving, right? It isn't just about you know, and I had this discussion with a leader very recently where, you know, I said your job is to establish these goals, then go to your managers and say, how are you going to
Yeah.
achieve these goals? Present to me your ideas and solutions because these are the goals. These are what we're doing. And I remember getting pushback saying, well, shouldn't they be a part of that goal definition? I was like, well, they can have an opinion about it. That's fine, but you're the boss. Like
Yeah.
it's okay to be the boss because I used to have this great boss that said, you know, work is like we've got this meter, right, where it's like this is a hippie love commune, right, from the 70s, and this is like a sweatshop. And what we want is we want to be like right in the middle. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We want people working hard, but we want them enjoying their work, you know, and we want it to sort of float in this middle part. But
Yeah.
again, to your point, Kevin, specifically, is that if you're not engaging the team to be a part of the solution, they're always going to feel like it's just more things being dumped onto them that they don't have any impact on. And so getting an offer from a place that says, hey, come in and help us change things up or do these, how can that not be more attractive than working at your place?
Yeah.
So,
So I think something that's really important about setting those strategic priorities is you're
yeah.
right. The ownership and the leadership team get to set those strategic priorities because they bear the burden, an inordinate percentage of the burden for the success or failure, more to the point, of the company, right? I mean, that is a tremendous risk in some ways that they're taking. But I think a really good leadership team will come together. They'll set those about 5 priorities
Yep.
and then they'll do exactly what you said. Hey, department managers, these are the priorities. I don't expect your department to solve every one of those priorities, but these two seem to be particularly in your area.
Mm-hmm.
Get together with your team and come up with goals
Mm-hmm.
that are going to help you achieve those priorities.
Yep.
And then flow that down into milestones and goals for the individual members of the team. And through that work, you can very easily see the connection of the dots. And what better thing for that employee to follow those breadcrumbs from what they did to the successful achievement of that strategic priority.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that, the company will be successful.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I've seen it where these bad leaders, they're too afraid of their customers and they're too afraid of their employees to get that involved. They step back and they it's so maddening. I've seen it over and over again where you know, well, I don't want to tell them what to do because they'll get mad, but they're mad already because you're not telling them what's important.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the clients. Like, well, I don't want to tell them that their idea is bad, but they're going to fire you in 6 months when you just execute on their idea. So, you know, like, and that's where I've seen the cycle continue on and on and on. And so I think it's imperative, just like you said, and I've said this on the show repeatedly, there's 2 kinds of people in the world. There's people who have a coach and there's people that don't know they need a coach. And so having someone like a Kevin coming in from the outside to be able to be disconnected from the culture and the mechanics and everything that's going on there and be able to look at it with fresh eyes is so important to the success of a business. So I really appreciate the work that you do, Kevin. And I'm sure there's, you know, again, we talk about business, but there's so much emotional labor, I'm sure, that has to go into the work that you're doing, right?
Yeah. Well, especially if the end result, hopefully, is that your clients have a more rewarding life as they define it, and you help them achieve that more rewarding life. To me, that's the end goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It does. And I think, again, to your point, it isn't about, and I love your story about the couple that was able to take a 2-month vacation from their business. But it isn't like a switch, because that's something I've also seen people get very nervous about, is that this is about learning. It's about training new muscles over time. This isn't, you're not suggesting that, hey, I'll come in, do some new systems, and then boom, in a week, you can go take a 2-month vacation, right? This is something
No.
this is a process. This is a lot of learning. This is stuff that takes time, right?
Yeah. And there's a method that I use to be able to earn that trust. So I usually come in for a relatively small engagement,
Mm-hmm.
and we begin to install a few basic tools, and we focus the company. And then we execute relentlessly on those things that are those focal points that are most important for the success of the business. And here's the key, Kurt. They begin to make more money. And as soon as you help a client make more money, you take a big jump forward in your level of trust.
You built a lot of trust.
Yeah. And so
Yep.
then they're able to say, okay, Kevin, what else could we do? Okay, now we're talking about a different kind of engagement. Now that we have some trust in each other, I would do these other things. Now, to swing this back around, something that you said that was really important is that, especially when faced with crises like we had in COVID,
Sure. Yeah.
a business owner will fall back to what they know how to do
Yeah, because they're
as an
scared,
individual.
right?
What's that?
Because they're scared.
Because they're scared. And they'll do that thing they know how to do, even if it's not in the best interests of the company. So, an example of that would be, as COVID hit, I was working with a client, and when I came on board with them, their number of inquiries were down. And inquiries being down meant revenue was down. And so what I did is I focused the company on inquiries. Like, what the hell's going on with inquiries that people aren't reaching out to us anymore? What do we need to do to get those inquiries up? But during that process, or during that time of crisis, what that company owner wanted to do was something that he knew how to do, which was to survey customers. And let's ask customers, like, okay, why aren't you buying?
Yep.
And it's like, well, wait a minute, that you're doing that because that's comfortable for you. What the company needs right now is to understand what's going on with our number of inquiries and
Mm-hmm.
why they're down. And as soon as we began to focus on inquiries, the revenue went up.
Yep.
And I was able to say to that person, what you were doing is you were reverting to what you were comfortable with, which is human nature. Because
Mm-hmm.
of, you want to do something, right? If you're the business owner and you're in crisis, it's like, I got to do something or I'm going to go crazy.
Yep.
But are you doing the right thing?
Right.
And you
Yeah.
sometimes, a business owner often needs someone to walk beside them on that journey, that coach and guide that says, well, we could do that, but I think this might be another direction. Or even to say to them, tell me how that's in the best interest of the company, or how does that fit into the priorities that we've chosen?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yep.
goes back to that accountability piece, right?
Yeah. Right. Because the only person in many of those cases that's holding that business owner accountable is that business owner, and from my experience, they don't do a great job.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin.
Absolutely.
Well, we are at time. So
Okay.
I wanted to thank you for joining me. If I want to know more about the work you do and how I can connect with you, and maybe have you come in and do some auditing of my business, where should I go and where can I find out more info?
Yeah, so thanks a lot. I appreciate that. The best way to connect with me is through my website. So my website is gyolai.com. It's GYOLAI.com. And I have another website for a product that we're just getting ready to launch, which is called Phoenix Business Operating System.com. Phoenix Business Operating System.com.
Got it. PhoenixBusinessOperatingSystem.com. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. I will when the show's over, I will include those links in the notes and such as well. Kevin, thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
That was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kurt.
No problem. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Before we go, I do have to mention one thing, which is we are hiring. That's right. And so if you want to get a chance to come and check us out, check out foundrymakes.com/careers. It's great. You can come and work with me. Not all the time. I mean, I've got a job to do. We can't be there all the time. So why are you making it weird? Don't make it weird. It's not weird. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day. I sincerely appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic rest of your week. I will see you again on Thursday with another live show. Talk to you then.